you streaming? Nothing yet. Oh, yeah, okay. We're on.
Got it?
We're on. Okay.
We're on.
Right. So,
Testing 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
okay. So, dictionary.
Yep.
So, I don't know if you saw the note I sent over on Discord. What I'd like to go through is get your
Yeah.
thoughts on ambient attribution, because that's the center of everything, really. And
Yep.
as part of that, traces, which last time I kind of introduced, but you're reading it live, and so you hadn't had a time to like contemplate it. Hopefully, you've had a bit of chance now. So on.
Yes, I did, but I'm still struggling with it. So
Okay.
bear with me, man.
All right. Well, that's that's almost certainly our fault for not making it clear.
Well, it's I think I'm having an issue with the fact that it's not a metric of any particular size or unit.
Yes.
It's just a nebulous
Yeah.
thing
Yeah. So
that you can't really. There's no boundary layer there, so. So when you say something's the smallest unit, but there's no unit or boundary layers, and my brain starts to explode.
Right. Yeah. No. I get it as well. I've actually proposed.
So now I'm thinking, singularities and event horizons and stuff. So.
Yes. Yeah. What is the smallest unit? So I've proposed one example, but it'd be good to talk through this because I've got a similar kind of noodling session to go into exactly what is the event that creates the trace. So let me give you a very high level run through of trace. That's probably a good way of doing it, actually. If we start with the trace, then we know the unit that we're talking about when we talk about ambient attribution. So if you're to think about the simplest and probably the easiest trackable is the acceptance of a pull request. So the intent of the trace is when you do work, whether you've been asked for it or not, that piece of work is yours, and you should get what you're due from that in the future. Now, you might be paid, in advance for that. You might assign rights for that, but that's an asset that you've created and you own. The trace is really there to capture that. The event, the only event actually I can think of at the moment, and there's probably others, is the acceptance of a pull request. So say if you contribute to a main branch, do some coding on that, put a pull request onto that main branch. As soon as that main branch says, we'll include that, then that trace becomes real, is a thing, which can be traced, which can be attributed in the future. There's a number of things that there's not so much edge cases. The biggest problem I've got with that pull request view is that it doesn't really take into account services. So it's the it's the guys at the coalface that can create traces just with that definition, if that's how far the definition went. But what you don't get is the useful contributions provided by managers, project managers, all the guys that help coordinate and so on, even down to the guy who is encouraging you from the sidelines, or we've got this kind of the stress test is with Jude and Sophie. It's like they should get some attribution for being so very kind and letting us build the Dreamcatcher. How do you attribute that into a trace? There's no PR there at all. But at its simplest, it's a PR that's accepted onto a main branch. And as soon as that happens, then you've got a trace, which is analogous to an NFT. And therefore, you can sell rights into it, you can transfer ownership into it, you can gain attribution from it. So that's the kind of the very high level run through of what a trace is intended to do.
Yeah, okay. All right, but I'm still struggling a lot on the boundary layer conditions here. Because it sounds like we're using this to measure something, like inches or millimeters or miles or kilometers or whatnot. But it doesn't really do that. So I'm trying to go back to the actual root of this and like what is this doing specifically that we need this definition? That's kind of where I'm having troubles getting out of here. Okay, so why do we need a definition of a trace? I mean, now I might see it from a code perspective, like there's something on the back end that needs this sort of functionality, but on the front end, the user side, do I care what the trace is, or am I defining it as the user?
Absolutely, you should care. So, say if you you spend a week, make changes to code, PR it. That trace is now something that you can sell. So, in the front end, in terms of the user, you've now got an asset, and presumably, when we get to the GUI, there'll be a list of your assets, and you could sell that asset to someone else. So it's your
that I understand. That concept that you're talking about, I can understand. The thing is that now we're saying that a trace is somehow there's a timer involved where if I start writing code from this moment till this to some other x plus 1 time, that's the boundary condition that is this trace.
Yep.
That is the code that I delivered. I think, right?
Yes. Yeah. So there's an event that turns simple work into a trace unit.
Right. So that means that somewhere on the user's end, that trace has to get turned on and turned off, right?
What do you mean by turned on and turned off?
Okay. So we're talking about a captured moment of effort, right?
Yep.
Time 0 to time t plus 1, whatever that is. So the clock starts on this effort that someone's done.
Yeah.
And then the trace starts from 0 to 11, whatever, days or seconds or whatnot. And then at that point, when the user is done, I guess maybe they say they're done, and it's uploaded to the pull request or something. And in which case, it's now become a quantifiable unit of effort, NFT/trace, correct?
Yes, correct. Yep.
Okay. All right. Okay, so from a code perspective, I can see this is extremely important. From a user perspective, I'm not sure we're there yet in terms of what the user needs to do. Per se.
Well, this is the whole point of ambient attribution is actually the user doesn't have to do anything. So let's take a narrative.
Right. Okay. So you're right. It shouldn't have to do anything, but the system isn't going to be super AI smart. So at some point, they're going to. I mean, we have to tell the system when to turn on and off this particular effort, because I could be working on 8 different projects at once. So when does the system know which project I'm working on when? Right. So.
Oh, right. Okay, I see. I think I see where you're. I think this is misperception. So this is not about time spent at the moment. So just to simplify things, let's take the creation of a trace event as the acceptance of a PR and nothing else. So you could be working on that for months, dipping in and out, thinking about it, and so on. And that work that you're committing to your own chain, because perhaps it's permissionless and nobody's asked you for it, is there on chain, and therefore is discoverable. So you can show the provenance of your work, but it's not something that's tradable. The turning it into a trace allows it to be tradable, and that requires an event. And at the moment, the event would be a PR. So you work in your analogy, if you work on 8 different projects and you're pushing each forward, it's not tracking time, it's not tracking effort or expended effort at all. It's at the point of an event turns into a trace, which then becomes something that you own. So you could be working on 8 different projects, you could be going on long walks, thinking about them and so on. if you're doing something on chain, the provenance of that and the work that you're doing is recorded in your own chain, but nobody knows about that. As soon as you PR and that PR is accepted, then it turns into a trace, and that now turns up in your front end as, okay, you've now got a unit of work that's useful, and that unit of work is being used by the project that accepted your PR. Now, perhaps that unit of work is useful elsewhere. So you could go around, for example, finding other projects and maybe altering slightly or maybe not, but PRing to them, and you get additional traces. Perhaps the project that accepted your PR is accepted into a bigger project and is bundled up into something else. And in that case, the trace of attribution goes back to you. Whatever the project has accepted in terms of your attribution, if they're accepted into a larger project, the revenue in a dispersal event that they get, part of that goes to you. And perhaps you want to sell rights, geographic rights, or in totality for that trace. That's a thing that you've generated. But the important thing I think you're driving at is there does need to be an event, because prior to that, I could just be writing nonsense. I could be writing, a novel that's never going to get published. Who cares? But as soon as there is an event that creates, that generates the information that this is actually useful to someone else, or useful in an application, then that generates the trace, and that trace becomes an NFT, for want of a better word, an NFT that can be traded. So there's to think about the timeline. I start work, look at a code base. I think actually they could do this better. I start working on the code. I'm doing that on chain. Then the provenance of that and the work is recorded, but nobody else cares yet. If I then do a PR and it's accepted, then someone cares and it turns into something, turns into a unit. Does that make sense?
Okay. So the trace is a puzzle piece that links between supply and demand. Is that what we're saying?
Yes. That's quite a deep. The reason I'm hesitating there, that's quite a deep rabbit hole. I'm very happy to go into. By supply and demand, if you could do this in a permissionless way, just turn up and contribute to a code base, PR, and it's created, and now you've got this thing. There's also previously what we call wishes, probably need a better word, where someone has just put up an idea and you take that on and you generate work that goes into creating that wish into an actual project. So on the demand side, it can be indicated by a wish. So this is if this piece of software existed, I would use it, and that indicates some level of demand. The PR on something you're doing in a permissionless way doesn't necessarily need that demand, because you could just turn up and, for example, comment the code. They might not have cared for it previously, or they might not care about that at all. However, if you PR and it's accepted, then that's a kind of post priori demand, as it were.
So if I had this straight, let's just go with the more edge case ambiguous definition. Mm-hmm. I'm a marketing guy, and I'm looking around and I see that there's a gap in certain projects. There's no pull request for this stuff, but this stuff is obviously needed from my point of view in order to get the word out. So I take it upon myself to write up some marketing material, mm-hmm. and then submit that marketing material. And then when I submit that marketing material, that becomes a trace. Is that correct?
Yes, that what you're... if it's accepted. And also the project...
Well, no, I mean, accepted or not. I'm just saying, okay, so I'm saying accepted or not, mm-hmm. once you've uploaded this to the Dreamcatcher for public consumption, whether the project A or project B decides to use this, does that become a trace or not? Does it only become a trace when it's accepted?
Yes. Now, you hit on the absolute crux of it, and this is something I'm still thinking about, could use your help with, is what are the events? Because the PR is an easy event for creating, something into a trace. If you were to generate, let's say if you never talk to anyone else, and you were doing work, the trace is the information that you have a thing here is still built up. I'm not explaining this very well. So let's say you're one guy in a bedroom somewhere who wants to write a piece of software. Inside Dreamcatcher, you create a project, and you write a bunch of code. The event is probably the asset that's created, that you're creating, which you can sell, which is not necessarily used by others. So there's
that is not a trace, though, right?
No, it should be. Well, there's.
Because I'm assuming by the name trace that there's some sort of handshake involved in this.
Yeah.
Whether it be digital.
Yeah.
Or verbal, or in real life.
And
that's why I keep coming back to it. It's a puzzle piece where you have two disconnected subjects, subject A and subject B, and the trace is the thing that comes in and kind of attaches to both of those things and links them together.
Yes.
Right?
Yep. Uh-huh.
Okay, so connection would probably be a more apt term for that.
Yes.
I'm not saying that we should stop using the term trace. I'm just saying that the term connection should be there in the definition somewhere to help people visualize what's going on.
Yeah.
In terms of
I see what you're saying. The trace really triggers the event of the trace at the kind of the meta level is as soon as it becomes useful to anyone else other than you. So say if I created a project for whatever reason and it just wrote down gibberish. The fact that you were creating lots of gibberish, the fact of that is still there, it's still recorded, but it's not a particularly useful trace. If you were to write,
it's still my asset.
Right.
I don't know what we're calling it right now, but I still have a boundary layer around that as being my property, right?
Correct. Yep. And that's still yours, but it's not. The fact of it turning into a trace really comes down to is this a tradable thing? Is this something that you get attribution for? And one of the indicators for that would be a pull request into another project, perhaps. Another thing would be you take that asset and then put it up onto the market.
Is full stop, like just it's hard coded in the language. Like you always get attribution for your work. It's whether or not the only way you get paid for that attribution is if other people consume it.
Yes.
Correct?
Yep.
All right. Okay. So we just have to be very careful that we say that there's attributions always on. It's not an opt out sort of thing. You always get it. It's only you only see a monetary or other asset sort of squishing sort of mechanism take place when somebody else needs it and or consumes it.
Yes, yeah, precisely. So the attribution is always generated against an asset that you're creating, whether that asset is gibberish or whatever. The trace is a wrapper that allows it to be traded or sold or rights sold to it, or it being used by another project where attribution is drawn down to you from another source.
Yeah, see, that's another thing I'm kind of getting hard on because I wouldn't say wrapper per se, because usually to me wrapper, I don't know, especially in smart contracts, wrappers are used to create proxies of other assets. You know what I mean? So like if I wanted to be able to use Bitcoin as a smart contract asset, I would need to use a wrapped BTC in order to do that. So it then has the functionality. It's a one-to-one hard copy of the coin. However, that coin now allows me to do smart contract functionality with it.
Yes.
Right? So it's BTC.
Yeah, quite right. Yeah, it's namespace clash. But the
okay, so
sorry.
Go ahead.
Go
ahead.
Let me choose a different word for a wrapper. It's if you're going to trade this sort of thing, you're going to put it onto a market. If you're going to sell rights to it, you need a boundary to what you're actually trading, and it's the trace that sets the boundary. So it's the thing that denotes the asset that you're selling or the contribution that you've actually generated that you can't possibly sell. Before that, you've still got the work that you've done, which again, if you wanted to go out and just generate revenue yourself, it wouldn't necessarily create a trace for that.
Okay, so is the trace information the metadata of the handshake? Or like inside the channel? Is that what we're talking about here?
Metadata of a handshake. Is that a good way of putting it? Yeah, to some extent.
Like so like the trace would be if I were to upload my asset to the Dreamcatcher, I would probably have to set up certain default values for how this is being utilized on film, right?
Yep.
So that would be inside the trace metadata, correct?
Yes. So in the case of, say, you've created something outside the Dreamcatcher and you load it up inside the Dreamcatcher, then that asset itself is tradable. Whether anyone wants to buy it is another issue, but that asset is tradable, and so is a trace.
No, but I mean, in order for someone to use it, they would have to comply with your trace handshake sort of metadata that you've.
That's right. Yeah.
Hard coded in that asset, or they wouldn't use it.
That's right. Yeah.
Like for instance, if I was a malicious code writer and I wrote code that said that, hey, you can use this code all you want, but as soon as you start using it, I get 100% of the attribution for everything, right? So
yeah,
that's not something that somebody would want necessarily. They wouldn't want a malicious piece of software in their system and eating up everybody else's attribution because their attribution now goes somehow floats to the top because of the way they wrote the contract or whatnot.
That's right.
So
and there's probably I haven't got as far as probably there's when you sell the sell trace, there is an event there which would have the results of a negotiation around it. So in that case, what you're saying, 100% attribution.
When you say sell a trace, so you're saying that once the asset has a trace, the trace now becomes the asset?
Say that
or
again.
That becomes the end?
Sorry, say that again.
So, all right. Because you just said the term sell when you sell a trace, that there has to be a negotiation to do this, right?
Yeah.
All right. So now we're saying that once the asset has a trace to it, the asset itself becomes the trace, right?
Yes.
Huh. Okay. That's probably where I'm getting stuck quite a bit. Because it's like a self-referral, it's a circular reference inside the logic here for this particular thing. That's why I'm having because I'm seeing the trace as like a connection, a link between parties. But you're saying that once the asset gets uploaded, it is the link between parties in and of itself.
No. So if you think about a trace as an NFT, the NFT.
I can get my head around.
Sorry?
That I don't have a problem with. I think I'm having a problem with when the NFT is moving. Right.
Right.
That's where we're.
So if we take the analogy of traces an NFT, then that NFT you can sell rights to, and you can define whatever those rights are in a trade. And that trade is the stopper that stops, so a malicious actor, for example, saying, if you use this, I get all your money. And it will define the rights that you have, what your attribution is, and that's denoted in the inputs into the attribution algorithm that the other side accepts, saying, okay, so I'm saying you can use this trace, say if, I'm just advertising and come and use it if you want. You can use this trace if these parameters into the attribution algorithm are as I, advertise. Could be some negotiation going backwards and forwards there, but the acceptance is the actual trade. The acceptance is not the trace. So the connection isn't the trace. The trace itself is the unit that you're talking about when you're making that trade.
All right, so then the term trace is really giving me a hang up then, because that's
all right.
So
what would be a better name for it then?
Oh, I'm not sure yet, but because when you talk about tracing, in my mind, I'm just thinking connections or taps and wires and like nefarious individuals and all kinds of other things. So, I mean, okay. So let's see. I'm a guy. I just wrote a piece of something, whether it be code or a piece of merchandise or whatever. I've uploaded it. It's not an NFT yet until someone wants it, and then when someone wants it and they agree to my demands, then it becomes an NFT. Is that what I'm? Is that? Am I correct?
Yeah. Yes, but with a slight caveat in that I think there's probably a list of events that is the transition between just a bunch of stuff that you've generated and it being something that you can trade.
I'm just trying to. I just want to get to
in essence, yes.
The three basic steps. What are the three basic steps? The three basic steps. I wrote one line of code, and I uploaded it as a library, and everybody wants to have that line of code in their contract.
Yeah.
And then once the trace is when that code becomes the NFT that everybody can now trade.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And then what does that NFT look like?
In what way? Sorry.
Oh, I'm just saying that. I'm asking myself. I'm not asking you specifically. Yeah. Okay, so when it becomes an NFT, similar to the wrapper analogy, there's going to be certain code attached to it now that's very important for it to function on the Dreamcatcher machine, so that it recognizes it as an NFT, and that attributions and other algorithms, contribution algorithms and other things start to turn on, right? Yeah. So it's the dip switches in the background start to go on, right, when this thing. Okay. All right. So, wow, what would you call that? That's really interesting. I don't know yet.
I see why trace is a confusing term, because the way we've defined it here, trace is smallest possible tracking. I think you've highlighted that and said tracking of contribution available. It's a record of contributions which is wrapped up into it's a unit that can be sold. But I think you're thinking about trace as some kind of movement, and therefore the connection that you were talking about before. So I think it is a less than perfect term for it. What would we call it?
I'm stumped at the moment. I'm going to have to move a little bit and see, but I may or may not come up with anything better than this right now. But I'll see what I can do. Now that I've literally wrapped my head around this a bit more, because I obviously, even by my comment, I was not understanding this at all, because I was trying to think of this. I think I was coming in from the code side of the whole thing, where like maybe something in the Dreamcatcher machine needed to have a base unit of value or something that was really important to code, where if I have a base value, then and if I count how many units this base value is, then I would know what the attribution would add up to or something. I don't know what I was thinking, but
yeah,
that's when. So I was seeing the smallest and that kind of stuff. That's where my head was going, was straight to how this can't be indivisible. Like, this is the smallest unit. Like, it's the atomic version of my asset. Like
the Planck length of effort. But
yeah, the Planck volume of that, right? It would be the Planck. Like, so, that's a really small number. The Planck volume, but it's really tiny.
It's ludicrously small. But it's not that. It's
okay.
It's
So ignore everything I've written here for now. It's not right. Okay, so I need to go back to the whiteboard in my brain and recontextualize what we just talked about. But what we'll do is we'll just park this for now, and we'll just say that I now have a better understanding of what it is you guys are trying to convey here.
Okay.
And I'll hope I can come up with something that's helpful here.
And
using what we talked about, we can start moving on to like attribution.
I'm going to put a comment here because I think you've shown that trace is ambiguous, so we need a better term.
It's it's not that the term itself is ambiguous. It's just that it's a verb, and then what we're talking about is more of a noun. So,
yeah, mind you, trace can also be a noun. It's one of these.
Yeah.
Okay, so well, if we park that, so when we talk about ambient attribution, we're talking about traces. We're talking about these units that attract attribution, as a way of bundling up what otherwise would be vague contribution, because as in the the ludicrous kind of Planck example, a single keystroke, you might have contributed, but that's not a useful unit of contribution. So trace is kind of a useful unit of contribution, which can also be bundled up into other things, trace, and that is the I guess if we were to extend the Planck analogy, that's the atomic level where actually the hierarchy of the dispersal event hits these atoms of traces. But before that, it's a mass of just stuff which, you can't get your teeth into that in terms of a system. You need something. Now, when you're thinking about this one, the thing I've been, and bear in mind, for a long time, Tom and I have been talking about contribution and attribution, and contribution was we've kept it necessarily vague because it's really quite hard to get a grip of what is a contribution, and how is that denoted. And trace is the first effort of, okay, so here's how you denote contribution in a way that actually makes sense in the terms we've been saying, that you can sell royalties, you can get future attribution for it, and you get ambient attribution if you create something. So this is the first step, and probably needs, and almost certainly needs to tighten up, but it's the first step into actually, when you say someone's put effort into something, what do you mean by effort? If a useful effort, how do you denote that? And the thing that I've been thinking about, and keep that in the back of your mind when you're looking through this, and if you've got any insights would be useful, is what's the events that turn just a mass of doing stuff into actually a tradable NFT. If I were,
that's where the mind map comes in for me.
yeah. I guess the and part of it is the I've been struggling with. This part of it is subjective. Think if you took a normal NFT. You could wrap anything into an NFT, right? I could draw Mickey Mouse here and then hold it up, saying this is an NFT and I want to buy it. But probably picking up my pen before drawing anything, that's not very useful. That's not going to be an NFT, but it's still effort. And so we need to chunk up from the minimum level of individual effort, individual keystrokes, or picking up a pen or whatever, to something that's actually usefully tradable or useful for other people, and therefore
so
contribution.
What I would say in that mind, again, I go back to the boundary layer conditions where is where okay, so if I'm an artist and I'm creating a painting, and that painting happens to be Mickey Mouse, I would think that that isn't tradable until I felt it was ready, right?
Right.
As the artist, right? So
right.
I would have to push, the event is I would have to push that out to the world and say it's ready. I have to hit the ready button. That's the event. Yeah. That in my mind would be, so I can sit here all day and write notes to myself all day talking about and write a manifesto how I think the world should work. But until I press send, it's not tradable. It's just my musings of life, right?
Yeah.
I would push that onto the world. That event has to be, I have to compile it. That's basically what we're talking about. We're talking about a compiled piece of
I like that. Yeah.
So, right? That's why I keep saying, I keep coming back to boundaries. There has to be a boundary somewhere. Somebody has to define the boundaries, or we're going to run into, the things. So,
I really like that. So the PR, the reason I used PR as the simplest event was because very similar to what you just said. When you PR, it's like, please consider this. This is a thing, and I'm happy with it. I wouldn't PR, half a line of code. I PR a line of code, for example. But your definition is
code at all. PR is giving a suggestion, right?
Well, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm just saying a pull request could be somebody saying, I really would like this feature in this code, please. I really need this because I'm doing X, Y, Z. And you seem to be up all the way up to this point where I can almost do X, Y, Z, but it's just missing this little bit, and I can't do that because I don't write code. So, hey, Mr. Code Guy, if you could write this for me, that'd be awesome. And I don't know what that attribution looks like, but that would be a pull request, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think your intuition there is right. The event, there'll be various examples of types of this event, but the event is when the author is saying, "Hey, look at this. This is a thing." Until then, it's just it's just records on your own.
Talking to me quite a bit, you're going to hear a lot of like stuff. Terms for me would be like change order, work orders, that kind of stuff, because that all comes out of engineering. So the event for us in engineering, it would be the change order.
Right.
Like, and if some external event happened, that drives the input to the change order. The change order then drives the input into the change itself to the product. The product is then changed, then tested, and then verified. Yeah. And then that goes back out to the wild. Yeah. That's the event. That's the chain of events that happen in any other engineering product design. Well, decent engineering product design. There's a lot of shady companies out there that do whatever. They skirt these layers, and planes follow the sky kind of thing. So, but I mean, that would be, in my mind, that would be the sequence of events, the minimum sequence of events you would need in order to justify some sort of like, I guess, an NFT that you would release to the wild. Now, I mean, like I said, we can go back to artists where the artist just paints a picture and puts it up on the Dreamcatcher, and people just seem to really dig it and they want to set it to their background on their desktop. Then that becomes, an attribution, right?
Right.
So that kind of thing. So, I mean, as people are using it, just like you would like stock photos from a stock photo site, people use those. The artist doesn't really get a lot. They don't get to see anything every time that photo's used. All they get to see is some sort of residual they get from stock photo company that bought the rights to it. That's all they get to see. So that bundle could be like the one photo in there could be a shining gem, and everybody's using it, but the artist wouldn't really know because they sold it as a package deal or something else, right?
Right.
And the people who are selling the rights to use the photo are making millions off it, and the artist would never know. But here it would be extremely transparent as to what's going on.
Yes.
You can't hide this through all that BS, that layer of BS where, this isn't really being used. It's like, dude, I can see that there's a gazillion downloads of this thing. Of course it's being used. Give me my fair share, right? So,
and that's it. I mean, the whole point, when we get to ambient attribution, the whole point is if you do something that's used by others, then you're due attribution. That's the kind of the core tenet of the entire thing. I think I love actually thinking about and listening to what you're saying. I love that definition of when just raw stuff becomes a trace is down to the author saying this is now a thing. I like that a lot. That doesn't mean that if you don't make that step, you don't own it. So, for example, if you go out and on a photo shoot, take 100 photos, 99 of them are rubbish and one's great. Those other 99 you still own, and maybe it's you put those up to be visible by others, which would be that trace event.
Yeah, but see, that would be just to give you an analogy of that. I mean, having done photography, you would know what that attribution would cost you in your time to take all those 100 photos.
Yeah.
I mean, if I go to a mate's wedding, which I've done before, and I take 500 or 600 photos, I know how much time that's going to cost me, because it's not just the 500 or 600 photos that you take; it's all the editing that comes after that.
Right.
It's the hours and hours of pouring through all those photos to find those gems in the editing of those photos. You know what I mean? I don't mean editing like actually touching up the photos. I mean the editing of actually going through each one and to boil it down to the core like 6 or 7 that are really good, or 10 or whatever the client wants, right?
Yeah.
So nobody takes that time into account, but the photographer does by by charging a certain amount. So this could be the same sort of situation. Like whoever's writing code would know what their time costs. Like for the most part, I mean not everybody, but I'm just saying that for the most, we'd have a rough estimate of a pretty good slice through what most people feel is an appropriate level of effort and time in money for their deliverable, for their NFT. So we would know by them setting the attribution, what they're willing to part with it for someone else to use it. We would know right away, like in economy, what the supply and demand is and what the fair value of people's efforts are right away. Like it would just wash out really quickly.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like we would know.
And
I mean, yes, people will get screwed on each end. Like people will be greedy and people are going to get screwed. But but everybody's going to know transparently what's happening, and they can readjust that really quickly. They can go, oh wow, I got robbed on that empty, but my next one, I'm going to make sure that I charge this. You know what I mean? They'll know like right away.
Yeah.
That feedback was instantaneous. You know.
And the important point about a trace is it includes its own attribution table. So in the case of one photographer, that attribution would just flow straight through to their own person object, and they would get it all. But say if the photographer wanted to recognize the fact that I don't know, someone his mate had helped him construct all the kit or set up the shot. That can be reflected into the attribution table for that trace. So whatever that trace generates in terms of dispersal effect, that person can get whatever it's 10%, or even down to the Jude and Sophie model. It's like I could just say, well, look, Jude's getting the kids up while I'm doing this call. I think she's worth 10% of whatever's generated from this call in the future. So I can set the attribution table and then put that up for use. Anyone wants to use it, that's fine. If they do, and there's dispersal effect, Jude gets a cut for that, which is quite important, capturing that the kind of the non-asset generating thing, because it's quite easy to put attribution to an asset. It's much harder to capture what is reasonable for the support around that, and it should be perfectly possible for you to capture the support around the people then and there who helped you create this asset, and that tracks through exactly the same attribution as everything else. And say if I don't know, there's a taxi driver who got you to a photo shoot on time, and you're thinking that guy looked like pulled it out brilliant, and he's on the Dreamcatcher, I'm going to give you a chunk of the attribution of the photos I do today, and you happen to capture a UFO landing, and then you make 100 million out of it, then that guy gets that attribution because you put that inside of the trace.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like becoming like a perpetual tipping mechanism in some cases. So,
yeah.
And if people become like small little heroes in your life and help you develop and produce, because what we're talking about is publication and production value of even the smallest little things that are happening around you, that be able to accommodate as something that you've actually done that's worth something, right?
Right.
That people want to use and see. So yeah.
Yeah, and then you can put it up to the world to use without your permissions, going crack on. But as soon as because they're doing it inside the Dreamcatcher, as soon as they make money, that flows through, and you get your just reward. That's the idea.
Right. There seems to be there's going to be a whole host of avatars in the system for a while, or placeholders, if you will, for people who have yet to log in, for lack of a better term.
Yep.
So there's going to be a lot of pools of attribution sitting there.
Well, that's right, because you can put attribution to someone who's not inside the Dreamcatcher. Yeah. You generate. I think we've gone through this. You generate the person, and then someone at a later date, so that attribution still flows to them. And at a later date, they can come and claim that by a certain amount of evidence that they actually are the person that you were referring to. I think the example that we keep on giving is Linus. It's like, okay, so let's, if we were to say 1% of everything in the Dreamcatcher flows through to Linus, Linus probably doesn't know about Dreamcatcher, certainly wouldn't be logging on or creating his own thing, but we can create an object that represents Linus, and then he can come and claim that. by presenting evidence.
How do we know who's the real him, though?
This is the tricky bit. Evidence is part of the kind of the multiverse, and so there'll be some kind of trigger, and I don't think we've defined this, but there will be some kind of trigger saying that's enough.
No. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is if there's another Linus with the same name, roughly the same age, and he logs in and says that I'm him. I mean, they're going through this particular problem right now with Bitcoin. I mean, that dude that keeps suing, that's saying he's definitely the guy. He's definitely Satoshi, but he's not.
I'm Spartacus. Yeah.
I mean, so my point is, like, if somebody else comes in with a vaguely, roughly close identity and then tries to claim the attribution because they somehow pass some sort of muster by fooling either the identity checks or whatnot, and then they've siphoned off a bunch of value somewhere. Like, I'm not saying that we have to solve that problem right now. I'm just saying that I can foresee that being misused quite a bit.
Yeah, the general idea would be, because the flip side of that is, if lots of people agree that Linus is due something from this, there could be like 100 Linuses out there, and then there could be, 1,000 people called Linus who are trying to claim this great pot. So the object that's created is actually is owned by the creator in terms of governance, and the governance transfer over to an earthing event of a particular Linus comes down to a PR against that object. So you PR against that object and saying, okay, so this guy has presented a birth certificate, whatever. I'm going to transfer control of this object, which has got this attribution, over to this actual guy because we've looked at it. Now, you might want to put that off to a service and say, well, I don't really care, but as soon as someone turns up with a birth certificate and a passport that you're happy with and it follows the description that I put in, then that's great. But what we previously called as ghost, the ghost that's created on behalf of someone who's not inside the Dreamcatcher is still owned by another user. And it's that transfer that is the event that they get the money for it. So say if there's 100 projects, everyone decides Linus is worth 1% of their project. You could have 100 Linuses. You could get pull requests to merge these and dedupe them, which is very useful. But it's the governance that eventually transfers the rights from that to a real person. So at a very high level, that's the concept.
All right. So if I'm reading this right, then in this attribution payment schema, what would happen is that Linus would log in, claim it's him, and then he'd have to go through every single payment.
Well, you would filter out for everyone who's saying, okay, what's out there. In the simple case, there's only one. That's fine. And then you would present evidence saying, I'm the real Spartacus. And transfer the governance of this trace to me, and then you get that. That's fine. If there's lots, then he's going to have to either get someone to go and dedupe them for her, which would be a very useful service, and perhaps that service is due some attribution for that, or he's going to have to do it himself.
Yeah, but how would someone unwind all that? I mean, wouldn't they have to have certain information to make sure that it's the same Linus, right? So they're in the same boat as Linus is. So if Linus is the right Linus, he's not a clone, right? Then there's still the issue of, well, if I'm going to deduplicate all this effort and I'm going to compile it into one Linus, I got to make sure that I'm compiling the right Linus because I don't want to be taking stuff from somebody else that happens to be named Linus.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, absolutely. So, which is why the dedupe is a merge, and that merge requires both governance bodies in those two separate objects to agree. And so a PR for a dedupe would revert to, okay, so who owns object 1, who owns object 2, or Linus 1 and Linus 2? Do you both agree that you're talking about the same thing? And there may well be backwards and forwards discussion over agreement on that one, but eventually either it is or it isn't, and you're content. And if it isn't, then it dedupes. So the important thing is there that it's the governance that decides, and that governance can spread out to whoever contributed, whoever has control of it.
I'm trying to figure out what the critical mass is there, where you get the dedupes get so small that it's not worth your effort to do. Like
yeah.
Like, oh, if I do this dedupe, it's only going to be 25 cents. Well, I'm not getting anything out of this. Why am I going to bother, right? So.
Well, yeah, and I guess that's similar to dust, isn't it? It's certainly open to someone automating it, perhaps, or someone deciding, actually, this is going to be my job. I'm going to run around the Dreamcatcher and deduping stuff. But the dedupe service is actually really valuable.
About the squishy bit where people like do dumb things, like type in the wrong name or something like that, like all these clerical errors that happen, right? So how do you filter all that, right? So this guy wrote Linus, but it doesn't have a U or something like. So again, how am I supposed to know this is the right guy, right? So I have to go in and start like Google this guy and tracking down the Linus without the U and making sure that this guy doesn't exist first.
You could just state it. If there's someone spelled Linus and Linis, someone comes along and spots, well, you talk about the same guy, and puts in a PR saying you should dedupe this. Then it'd be down to the government saying, okay, I own the Linus and I own the Linus. Are we talking about the same guy? Yeah, okay, dedupe. And you're right, below a certain level, it's probably not going to be, worth your while.
Not worth your while, but even the governors would be looking at going, I can't be asked to answer 1,000 emails for this. I don't care. I don't know. I'm just thinking, like, when does the laziness kick in?
It'll be interesting to find out. And I'm sure below a certain level, it is going to kick out. But probably what I'd expect is the network effect kicks in, so that if you think, okay, Linus is due something with this one, so I'm going to filter against Linus, and there's one Linus that lots of people attribute stuff to, and you look at the record, the object on that one, and saying, yeah, that's the guy. So it's probably going to be easier to find a pre-existing one than create 1,000, fractional ones. But I don't know. That's really kind of user behavior. It'll be fascinating to see whether actually that's what happens.
Right. Well, that's why I kept telling Tom that this is going to be postdoctorate work for economists for years to come. It's riding through, because behavioral economists alone are going to be having a field day with data.
Right, but imagine, there's, let's make this ludicrous, there's 1 million Linuses out there because nobody's bothered to actually pre-search to see if a pre-existing Linus. And they're all, every Linus is attributed, $1. There's a job there that, someone can go in and do the deduping and say, I'm going to get 10% attribution of the final deduped real Linus. And now, he's got 10% of, $1 million. That'll be maybe worth doing. But where it's quite obscure and there's not many, then the search necessarily is going to be quite low to dedupe. So there's probably not going to be more than one dude, for example. There might be two tops, and it'd be quite easy to actually dedupe yourself. If there's many, then that duping service is actually quite valuable, and it's open for anyone to go ahead and do it, and offer to the government saying, I'll sort all this out, and the attribution for the effort to sort it out will go to me. But again, it comes down to the governance for each one to say, yeah, okay, that's fine.
Okay.
But yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see how, because I've just described something in abstract, but reality has a way of of throwing up all sorts of interesting stuff.
Oh yeah.
But that's how it's at this stage, that's how it's intended to work.
Okay, so just coming back, kind of circling back to ambient attribution.
Mm-hmm.
So I have what I thought ambient attribution is, and I think you and I probably don't agree to what ambient attribution is. And that could just be my ignorance, but I was under the assumption that ambient attribution would be kind of like the Linus subset of people who are just sort of like, they have this archetype sitting there on the network collecting a pool of attribution waiting to be claimed. That would be an ambient sort of attribution. It's just kind of like in the ether, just sitting there, not really doing anything. Right?
Yes,
there's no.
That's a subset of what I'd argue it is. So
Okay.
the superset includes people who are on the Dreamcatcher who do work, put it out there for others to use, and then just leave it alone.
So that would be active attribution then?
It's still ambient, or we still describe it as ambient, because what you're not doing is you're not going off and looking for a seller, negotiating, a sale and saying you can use the rights for this in this case. So say if you wrote a zip program, you could just put it up, make it visible through the ACL. Anyone can do that, and others could use it, and without any kind of interchange with you, and the attribution is still going to go back to you for that piece of work.
So wait, okay, so then, I guess we're seeing it from two different perspectives. I'm seeing it from the activity of the user, and you're seeing it from the activity of the Dreamcatcher, probably, where it's just the ambient means just that it's in the background, like the cosmic background radiation of the Dreamcatcher, and it's just coming along and paying out and doing its algorithmic calculations. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, that's right. And the distinction of being inside the Dreamcatcher and outside the Dreamcatcher doesn't matter that much. As we've just gone through about the Linux example, the fact is there is something inside the Dreamcatcher that others can use, and when they use it, the attribution flows through to whoever is the owner of that asset or that trace.
Right. Okay. All right. So my comment's incorrect. Then
it's not incorrect. It's just not complete. It's correct but incomplete.
Well, yeah. That's what I mean by incorrect. It's just not. It doesn't take into account everything else you've been discussing about it. So
yeah.
That, and I was coming from a user perspective where if I'm an active user, then I would have active attribution if people are buying and selling and trading my NFTs, right?
Right. Yeah. I see where you're coming from.
And ambient attribution would be someone who isn't necessarily active on the system, but is getting attribution. So I'm not sure what else to call that if it's not ambient. So I guess we probably need to call it something else then, to identify it as a subset of this. And it's not ambient, it's something else where it's more like stagnant, but I don't think stagnant's a very good term for it. But it's sitting there and it's not moving necessarily. It's accumulating but not moving.
I mean, at its core, those two are the same. The only difference is there someone who's created a user inside the Dreamcatcher, or isn't there? And if there isn't, then we've got the previous thing we were talking about where a user can be actually, created by another, and then you can come and claim it. But one step down to that is the core of this idea is exactly the same. Is if there's some work that is used by others that generates some kind of dispersal event, then you're due something from that. And that's same whether you're inside or outside the Dreamcatcher.
Yeah. Okay.
So I actually pulled this together because Tom quite rightly pointed out that I didn't have a definition of ambient attribution inside of the dictionary, even though that's the most important thing. But the reason that it wasn't in there was we covered it and written it in great length elsewhere. And so I just pulled this in. It looks more like a white paper, this definition. This is not really a definition. It goes into quite a lot of detail.
Where are you at?
I'm on page 7, ambient attribution, and it continues to
page 7.
Continues to page 10.
Okay.
Have you had a chance to read through this? It's quite lengthy.
Well, no, I don't remember this being here. When did you add this? Oh, wait a minute.
About 3 days ago, something like that. So
relatively recent. I would have read it then. No. There's no way I would have seen this thing. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So yeah, no, I have not seen this yet.
That's all right. Can you give me 1 minute? I'll leave you to do a quick skim, but this might be the topic for the next call.
Yeah, sure.
Might trip down and have a look at some of your other comments, but be back in 1 minute.
Question would be, what's the difference between ambient and just attribution?
Ambient attribution is the overall concept. Attribution is the object inside of a user object which holds attribution algos. So ambient attribution is the
ambient attribution is the subject, and then and then attribution is the function within the code.
Yeah, so ambient attribution, is the subject, and then ambient attribution arises by the combination of contribution, traces, and attribution. And attribution can be further divided down in terms of functional events into the attribution algos. Now, algorithms actually do the attribution.
Okay, so I would say then that this term attribution within ambient attribution probably needs to be defined here as to what we mean by that type of attribution. Like that's probably some sort of code value or something, right? So
Hold a second.
So I mean, I'm saying ambient attribution is again probably more of a circular reference, unless we define what that means by this term attribution in here. That we're nesting in here.
So the definition of attribution is on page 22.
Right. No, I understand. I'm just saying that.
Yeah, I see what you're getting at. It's like it's like attribution. It's almost like attribution can be divided down into ambient attribution and some other type of attribution, whereas actually the other way around. Ambient attribution is the
I can say it as ambient attribution. So there you go. And I would be right.
Yes. Yes. That terminology is not great, is it? Okay, let me put a note into that.
Handles corruption, fairness, discovery, attack mitigations. Dishonesty. Okay. Yeah, whoever wrote this really got screwed over a couple times.
Say again, sorry?
Whoever wrote this paragraph here got screwed over a few times.
Yeah, I think that's me. Or it could have easily been Tom's been screwed over equally a number of times.
Yeah,
you probably have as well, right? Anyone who enjoys building stuff is generally speaking screwed by people who benefit from the stuff you've built, don't necessarily contribute.
Sure, handles this sort of thing. We don't want it to handle corruption or fairness or discovery. We don't want corruption, fairness, or discovery in the system.
Good spot. Yeah. If you want to be corrupt, here's the place to go.
So the ambient attribution algorithm is where we get our corruption from. So it handles it.
Excellent spot.
Yeah.
names to...
All contributions must be open to scrutiny. So are we talking about auditability then? Is that what we're saying? Contributions are auditable?
Where are you, sorry?
I'm just right here, line 1 here. Transparency of operation. All contributions must be open to scrutiny, so that means all contributions must be auditable, right?
Yes. The fact of them, not necessarily the content of them. But if you go to arbitration and you're saying, hey, I did this, the fact that you did it is available for all to see. So that's the kind of core tenet of the transparency piece. And say you could take that. Okay, so I do a bit of work for you, or I do a bit of work. That contribution is recorded against mine. The fact that I've done that contribution is available. If I've set the privacy such that nobody sees what it is, that's not very interesting. But if I claim against another project saying, hey, you've used my stuff, maybe, it comes from outside the Dreamcatcher and you just copied and pasted and using it, the fact that you've got that there can be submitting to an arbiter and saying, well, yeah, no, that's largely the same thing. So that the scrutiny is through arbitration. But the fact of your contribution is just a brute fact. It's there. So nobody can say after the fact that, well, it's a bit like the kind of poor man's IP assignation, isn't it? Where you write your novel, stick it in an envelope and send it to yourself so you have a date stamp. It's a little bit like that.
Right. Gotcha. Oh my god, I hate Google Docs so much.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
We need to move off this. We need to move off it pretty quick.
Oh my god.
I do everything in Sublime Text. I love Sublime Text. I know. I think Tom uses Emacs. I don't know what your preferred is, but just raw text is so much nicer and Markdown. But it does have the comments thing, which is useful.
Yeah, that's the important thing. But I mean, obviously, all my comments just disappeared, so I don't know what happened.
It would be much better if we. Oh, what happened to your comments? I wasn't clicking.
I don't know. Doing some edit here. I was trying to. You put resist corruption, and I wanted to put the word through here. Through fairness, discovery.
If I undo, what happens?
I did something, and then now all my comments are just gone. I don't know what happened. So everything on this page.
Oh shit! Right. That wasn't a good idea. Oh, okay. Oh, it's back. Yeah. Let's get off this. Let's get a repo. We'll use because. This is not transparent and immutable. Doing it in Google Docs, it's really not something we should be using. Maybe that should be the
my old position. I use Google Docs, and I swore every day on it. I'm like, dude, you guys have to stop using this. It's a trash program. I lose so much time using this stupid freaking folder system that they have where things get overwritten all the time, and I'm like, how is this happening? How is it? I'm losing a day or two of work because Google decides, hey, you didn't do anything. I'm just going to overwrite everything.
I know.
Why?
And it hides shit as well. And it's like, it's like, oh, we'll give you a search bar. It's like, I can't remember what the name of it is. God damn you! And so I do not like Google Docs at all. I'm constantly hunting and pecking, trying to find stuff that we've done a year ago. I know we've done. But anyway,
all right.
We'll get it into a repo as soon as we possibly can. Actually, now is probably a good moment.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to put in that because I undid it. It's back to handling corruption.
Yeah, see, like, I don't know what's going on here. Like, Google does not like us.
No. It's like the Eye of Sauron is on us.
All right, so I'm not going to have time to go through all this tonight, so I'll leave it. I'm just going to put here, just to give me a starting point. So when I log in tomorrow, I can start looking from here and kind of go through here with the same mindset now, what I understand being a trace.
Yep.
And also look into what a trace is. So, all right.
Yeah. Cool.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah. No, that's all good. That's all good. I'm going to continue going back through the dictionary to make sure that I think there's some deprecated stuff still in there, so I want to get rid of that first. Because when we were talking about it, we had quite a lot of specific instances, and what I want to do is wrap them up into single definitions, because they're essentially the same thing with different parameters or different values for their parameters. So I'll go through that. When are you next available?
I mean, I don't see why we can't do something, let's say, on Thursday, supposedly, yeah.
Yeah, Thursday's good.
Yeah, that's all good.
Let me avoid the mistake of last week and actually get it into the calendar now.
Whoa. Okay, all my comments just showed up again. What is going on? I don't know what's happening, man. This thing is possessed.
Oh,
all right.
I hate it. Unfortunately, it's kind of slightly useful, but okay, right, I'll send that. But as soon as we get off it, the better. I think we could do everything that we're doing now using Git without much loss of functionality. I mean, maybe a little bit of functionality would be a bit more clunky, but in essence, I'd be much happier if we're using MD on Git. Radical transparency. What's the difference between radical transparency and transparency?
Radical transparency is that we want to make sure that, all things that can be discovered are discoverable. Like it's an open book, man.
If I was to say this window is transparent, it's like, no, it's not transparent. It's radically transparent.
Yeah, it's radically transparent.
Okay, sorry, I'm just messing with you now. Okay, right, good. We've got Thursday.
Basically, so think of it. So radical transparency is like an amplifier.
Mm-hmm.
So everything that we do amplifies transparency on the system. That would be radical transparency.
Okay.
So it's not just that the system is transparent, but everything that we do on the system also makes it more and more transparent. You know what I mean?
Yes, I do. So, there's transparent is passive thing, but radical transparency is actually actively supported by the system.
Active transparency. So it's just like you're actively participating in making sure that things stay transparent.
Right. Yeah. No.
By your actions in effects in interactions. Right.
Yeah. No, that's good. So apologies for pulling a chain about radical there. I've got a mistrust of adjectives.
I've had my fair share of radical glass breaking on me, so I know it's like.
The hairs would go up in the back of my head every time I see an adjective. It's like, do we need that? Or, But yeah, no, it does add to that. Now, just in the last few minutes then before you head off, the boring admin stuff of versioning and so on, which I love your approach. Versioning is one step forward towards context. So I've added in, I don't know if you saw it, you're adding in an index. You can see the boilerplate.
No, I saw it,
yeah. If there's you're more skilled in the art in this than I am, so feel free to improve and so on. But there's quite a lot of documents that Tom and I have produced, which need to be deprecated. But before being deprecated, I want to look through that we're not losing stuff. For example, this ambient attribution definition largely came from a document we wrote about a year ago. So, but we need to corral this information because as soon as we get, there's kind of doubling size on complexity on docs, isn't there? And we're starting to accelerate. So, just to say, absolutely with you on the versioning. But if you can have a look at the index or any other way you think from your experience is a better way of doing it, then crack on. But
no,
you got a supporter.
Yep, no problem. Can do.
Other than that, shall we leave it there? I think that's quite an intense session on trace.
Yeah.
And I'll see you on Thursday.
Thursday. Right. Yep.
Pleasure as always, man. Enjoy that.
Hey, thanks for the time. Appreciate it.
All right. See you soon. See ya.